Does like a $5 million argument over a foul-smelling sewer pump end up dictating the future borders of an entire city?
Yeah, it sounds like a joke, right?
It really does. But today, we are doing a deep dive into the source material, specifically a May 1st, 2026 article from the Lexington Herald-Leader. And we're going to uncover this hidden war over, well, civic plumbing.
Which is way more intense than it sounds.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you've probably experienced this. You're driving down a road, you see backhoes, traffic cones, a giant trench, maybe a sign apologizing for a municipal infrastructure project.
Right, and most of us just, turn up the radio and speed past.
Exactly. But our mission today is to show you the invisible battlefield beneath those traffic cones. By the time we finish, you will see how a seemingly mundane wastewater decision becomes this high-stakes proxy war.
A war involving public schools, private developers, and literally millions of taxpayer dollars.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can dive into the controversy over where this pump station actually belongs, we really have to establish why Lexington is suddenly so desperate to build it.
Right, there is a very real ticking clock hanging over the city's head here.
And it comes in the form of a 2011 U.S. Environmental Protection Agency consent decree.
Yeah, the EPA mandate is really the engine driving this entire timeline because, a consent decree is a binding federal settlement.
Not a suggestion.
Not at all. The EPA evaluated Lexington's stormwater and sewer systems, found them severely lacking, and essentially ordered the city to eliminate sanitary sewer overflows by a hard deadline of 2030.
Right, because when a city's aging infrastructure combines, like heavy rainfall with municipal sewage,
Yeah.
the system just backs up. It overflows into local waterways or even streets.
Exactly. And the federal government does not politely suggest you fix that. They legally compel you to, under threat of massive financial penalties.
So it is essentially like a landlord forcing you to overhaul the plumbing in your rental house by a specific date.
That's a great way to put it.
You don't have a choice in whether the work gets done, but you do get to figure out the logistics of how and where you make those fixes. And Lexington is really feeling the pressure.
Oh, absolutely. The source material notes the city still has 10 remaining projects to complete before that 2030 deadline.
10 projects.
Yeah.
Wow. And Charlie Martin, the acting Environmental and Public Works Commissioner, is so up against the wall that he actively bumped 2 other municipal projects down the priority list.
Just to focus on replacing this one specific facility, which brings us to the current failing facility located at a site called Mint Lane.
Right. And the engineering reality there is just grim.
Very grim.
Yeah.
The pump station suffers from frequent overflows and generates persistent complaints from the surrounding neighborhood about noxious odors.
Which is an active environmental nuisance. It clearly has to go.
Yeah, so the city commissioned a $160,000 engineering study to figure out their options. And that study laid out 3 primary pathways.
I noticed the city council threw out the third option almost immediately. That was a location near the Bluegrass Airport, and it was discussed during an April work session.
Right, because it carried an estimated cost of $48.4 million.
Yeah, which makes total sense to scrap. That's a huge number. So that leaves 2 real contenders. Option 1 is rehabilitating the current site at Mint Lane.
And the study estimates that at $19.6 million.
Right, but option 2 is moving the whole operation downstream to a location on Bowman Mill Road called Mill Ridge Farm.
And that option jumps the price tag to $24.9 million.
Right, an extra $5 million.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this $5 million gap is what triggers the entire border war.
How so?
Well, a strictly fiscal mayor looks at that delta and says, we choose the cheaper option. Case closed.
Makes sense.
But the local developer community looks at that same $5 million as a massive bargain for unlocking the real estate potential of surrounding land.
Ah, I see. That fundamental mismatch in how the 2 sides value civic infrastructure is what turned a plumbing upgrade into a fierce political debate.
Precisely, which introduces us to the invisible geography of Lexington.
Right, Mill Ridge Farm, the site of the more expensive downstream option. It's owned by Headley and Price Bell.
And crucially, this farm sits just outside Lexington's current urban service boundary.
Which is a huge deal.
Oh, it's the most critical variable in this story. Lexington established this boundary decades ago to protect its famous horse farms from urban sprawl.
So it's a strict line on a map.
Yes. Inside the line, the city provides high-capacity sewers and urban services, allowing for dense housing developments.
Right.
But outside the line, land is generally restricted to agricultural use or very low-density housing that relies on septic tanks.
Consequently, the moment land gets access to a municipal sewer line, its financial value skyrockets.
Yeah.
Because it can finally be developed into, lucrative residential neighborhoods.
Exactly. And the timeline of events in the article paints a very specific picture here.
Yeah, let's look at that. In June of 2025, the Bell family hosts a design open house showing off a proposed upscale development on a portion of their Mill Ridge farm.
Right. And then 2 months later, in August, the city council makes a pretty unusual move.
They specifically direct Commissioner Charlie Martin to explore Mill Ridge Farm as a potential site for the new pump station.
You can see the mechanism at play here. Members of the agricultural community and figures like John Phillips immediately threw up a red flag.
And Phillips is particularly relevant here, right?
Yeah.
Because he served on a 2023 committee that explicitly evaluated which land should be added to the urban service boundary during the city's previous expansion.
Yes, exactly. Mill Ridge Farm lobbied heavily to be included in that 2023 expansion area. But they were excluded. The boundary line was drawn, and they were left on the outside.
Wait, so the opposition is essentially saying this is a backdoor taxpayer subsidy.
That's exactly what they're saying.
Like, by pushing for a municipal pump station on their farm, the developers get the city to pay for the exact infrastructure they would otherwise have to build themselves, just to launch their upscale development.
That is the core of John Phillips's argument to the council. He stated flatly that approving the Mill Ridge site represents a private benefit at the public expense.
Right.
Furthermore, placing a high-capacity pump downstream on the farm also meant that developers working in the newly expanded Parker's Mill area, which was added to the boundary in 2023, would be spared the cost.
Spared the cost of installing their own localized pump stations.
Exactly. Taxpayers would be footing a $25 million bill that directly subsidizes multiple private real estate ventures.
I mean, I get that, but I want to challenge the opposition's outrage here for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
If we acknowledge that a city is inevitably going to grow outward, isn't placing infrastructure downstream just smart anticipatory city planning?
That's a fair point. Like, if you know housing is eventually going out that way, shouldn't you lay down a comprehensive municipal pipe network now? Rather than doing the bare minimum upstream and forcing developers to build this fractured, inefficient patchwork of private pumps later.
Well, you're describing the perpetual tension in urban planning. It's a philosophy of infrastructure-led development, where the city proactively builds the skeleton of growth.
Right.
Proponents argue centralized, city-managed sewer networks are vastly superior and more ecologically sound than relying on dozens of private, developer-managed lift stations.
That makes sense from an engineering perspective.
It does. However, the opposition counters with a question of democratic process. If a comprehensive public committee just voted in 2023 to restrict growth from that specific farm, using a utility upgrade to bypass that zoning decision, well, it undermines the public's trust in the boundary line itself.
Okay, I see. The Bell family didn't just sit back and take that criticism, though.
No, they mounted a sophisticated defense of the Mill Ridge site, fundamentally attacking the math of that cheaper Mint Lane option. Yeah, Price Bell famously told the council that the Mint Lane site was all risk and no reward.
Right. And when he says that, he is pointing directly to the engineering complexities highlighted in the city's own study.
He's arguing that the $19.6 million estimate is basically a mirage.
He is isolating the vulnerability of the contingency budget. Any major municipal construction project builds in a contingency fund,
A buffer of cash to handle unexpected subsurface issues or material delays.
Exactly. Because the Mint Lane site sits in a highly constrained area with challenging topography, Bell argued the city is almost guaranteed to exhaust that financial padding.
So once those hidden engineering hurdles start piling up, the $5 million savings just evaporates in cost overruns.
That's his argument. And Bell also took aim at the expansion rumors. He insisted to the council that this is purely an infrastructure decision, not an expansion decision.
Right. He reminded everyone that laying a sewer pipe doesn't magically rezone agricultural land into a residential subdivision.
Yes. If his family wanted to formally add their land to the expansion area, they would still have to navigate a grueling, separate regulatory process.
A process the council actually just approved earlier that February.
Right. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Wait, I usually say that catchphrase. But yes, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, my bad. Yes, tell us what the Bell family introduced.
Well, They introduced a variable that completely scrambled the council's cost-benefit analysis, a massive environmental grant.
Right. The Bells are in the process of developing a wetland mitigation project on their property, and they have secured a $2 million grant from state officials to fund it.
But why does a state wetland grant care about the location of a municipal sewer pump?
It comes down to watershed mechanics. A successful wetland requires a specific, consistent volume of water flow to sustain its ecosystem.
And the current Mint Lane pump station is located upstream.
Exactly. As long as it remains there, it alters the natural hydrological flow of that area. It essentially diverts the water away from the downstream property.
So state officials warned that if the pump is not relocated downstream to Mill Ridge Farm, the proposed wetland will be starved of the water it needs to survive.
And they will pull the $2 million grant.
Wow. So the infrastructure literally dictates the environment. The council is suddenly looking at a scenario where choosing the, quote, cheaper Mint Lane site actively kills a $2 million ecological project.
It's a huge complication. Councilmember Liz Sheehan brought up a seemingly logical workaround, though. She asked, couldn't the city just use its own funds to replace the state grant and build the wetland anyway?
But Commissioner Martin immediately shut that down.
He did. He clarified that the city's stormwater funds are heavily restricted and simply do not have the bandwidth to absorb a $2 million ecological project out of pocket.
And to escalate the financial calculus even further, the Bells indicated they might be willing to outright donate the necessary acreage on Mill Ridge Farm to the city for the new station.
Right. So the council was forced to weigh incredibly divergent assets. Do you accept donated land and secure state environmental funding by authorizing a $25 million build?
Or do you protect the integrity of the urban growth boundary by forcing the build into a cramped upstream footprint for $20 million?
Which brings us crashing back to the reality of that cheaper footprint, because the Mint Lane site is not just a blank spot on a map.
No, it sits on highly sensitive property owned by Fayette County Public Schools. More specifically, the proposed footprint is right next to Paul Laurence Dunbar High School.
The human element of urban engineering becomes impossible to ignore here. Remember the baseline conditions of the current Mint Lane pump?
Frequent overflows and severe noxious odors.
Right. Councilmember David Sevigny reached out to Dunbar High School officials who expressed intense apprehension.
Because the city isn't just proposing a small shed. They need to install a massive piece of infrastructure directly adjacent to the high school's baseball field.
Yeah, it requires building a wet weather storage tank. From an engineering standpoint, this is a gigantic subterranean reservoir designed to capture and hold excess municipal water during peak storm surges.
So instead of the system overflowing into the streets when it rains heavily, the sewage is diverted into this massive holding tank until the storm passes and the pumps can catch up.
Exactly, and the visual of teenagers trying to play a baseball game while a subterranean tank fills with raw municipal stormwater just feet away, it's jarring.
Very jarring.
All right.
The school district's involvement also introduces severe legal friction.
Yes, because the city does not own the Mint Lane land. They have to acquire it from the public school system.
And the $19.6 million estimate assumes a standard appraisal and purchase price. But negotiating a land transfer between two distinct public entities, a city government and a school board, can trigger a protracted legal and bureaucratic process.
And with the federal EPA's 2030 deadline looming, any legal delay could push the city into noncompliance.
That is likely why Councilmember Sevigny argued the two proposals were not actually far off in cost.
Right. If you factor in the high probability of exhausting the construction contingency, the lost wetland grant, the donated farmland, and the potential legal delays with the school board.
The $5 million gap shrinks rapidly.
It really does. Yet Commissioner Charlie Martin stood firmly behind the Mint Lane site, offering strict engineering reassurances to the high school.
He clarified that the wet weather storage tank would be completely inset into the ground. It wouldn't be some imposing industrial silo casting a shadow over the outfield.
More importantly, he emphasized that modernizing the facility solves the odor crisis. The current failing pump lacks any odor control technology, but the new design incorporates advanced scrubbing systems to eliminate those noxious emissions entirely.
Martin also pointed out a harsh geographical limitation. The school officials understandably wanted the facility pushed as far away from the baseball field as possible.
But Martin noted that shifting the footprint further away essentially pushes the pump right back outside the urban growth boundary.
They are boxed in by their own zoning laws. He did offer a slight concession, though.
Right, promising the council he would return to them if subsurface testing at the Dunbar site proved too problematic or exorbitantly expensive, leaving a tiny procedural escape hatch.
Ultimately, the debate was settled by the executive branch's strict focus on the balance sheet. Mayor Linda Gorton urged the council to approve the Mint Lane site.
She stripped away the complex variables regarding developers, wetlands, and school boards. Her rationale was fiercely pragmatic.
The city has a legal mandate from the EPA to stop the overflows and fix the odor by 2030, and the Mint Lane site achieves those exact parameters for less upfront capital.
It is like choosing between patching a leaky roof for $5,000 today or tearing off the entire roof for $10,000 so you can eventually build a second floor.
The mayor looked at the municipal budget and chose the patch. During the Tuesday work session, the council finalized the decision with a 10-5 vote in favor of the Dunbar High School location.
Right. And the 5 dissenting votes, Sevigny Sheehan, Vice Mayor Dan Wu, Amy Beasley, and Shayla Lynch, clearly felt the long-term risks of the school site or the lost environmental opportunities at the farm outweighed the initial savings.
What's fascinating here is... Wait, I'm stealing your lines again.
That's all right, I'll take it. What's fascinating here is how theoretical value routinely loses to immediate fiscal reality in municipal politics.
Yeah.
The abstract promise of long-term developer efficiency, the threat of contingency exhaustion, and the preservation of watershed hydrology are all incredibly valid planning concepts.
But they are notoriously difficult to sell to a voting public when a spreadsheet clearly shows one option costing taxpayers $5 million less today. So what does this all mean? We started with a federal mandate to stop raw sewage from leaking out of old pipes.
And we watched that mandate cascade into a border war over private real estate subsidies, high school baseball fields, and million-dollar environmental grants.
It proves that the fine print of local zoning is where the true mechanics of a city are determined.
This raises an important question for anyone living in a growing municipality. We assume infrastructure is merely a reaction to urban expansion, that we build pikes because the people are already there.
Right.
But this deep dive into the source material reveals the exact opposite is often true. The pipes determine where the people are allowed to go. When a city builds public infrastructure, does the infrastructure follow the growth of the city, or does the city's growth follow the infrastructure?
And when private landowners and public utilities have intertwining interests, who really gets to draw the map of the future?
Exactly.
When private land valuation relies entirely on public utility placement, the fight over a single backhoe is never just about concrete. Keep that in mind the next time you drive past a muddy construction site on a Tuesday afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.